The monitor wasn't just beeping, it was screaming a high-pitched, relentless tear in the sterile silence that signaled a heart battering itself against a ribcage. There was no build-up, no gradual decline, just the sudden, violent thrashing of a man who was technically already dead, fighting the physics of his own collapse. Blood, dark and vinous, didn't pool, it sprayed, misting the pristine white coat of the chief of trauma before hitting the linoleum with a wet, heavy slap. "Hold him down!" "God damn it," I said, "hold him." Dr. Harlan Cray's voice cracked, losing its polished authority in the sheer chaos of the moment. The patient on the table was massive, a landscape of scarred muscle and fresh, ragged shrapnel wounds that chewed through the tactical vest he'd been cut out of. He wasn't sedated. His metabolism was burning through the propofol faster than the IV could drip it. He bucked, the metal railings of the gurney groaning under the torque of his grip. His eyes were wide open, blown pupils swallowing the irises, seeing nothing but some distant, horrific horizon. Talis' jaw didn't flinch. She didn't look at the blood on the floor. She looked at the man's neck. She was 24, with hair the color of dried wheat, pulled back so tight it pulled at her scalp, and hands that were roughened, not by sanitizer, but by years of work on a sprawling, dust-choked ranch in Wyoming before she ever put on scrubs. She stood at the foot of the bed, her small frame seemingly invisible to the wall of white coats surrounding the dying man.
"He's in V-fib! Charge to 200!
Cray yelled, the paddles whining as they built up lethal energy.
"Clear!"
The body arched a violent, galvanic spasm that lifted the soldier off the table. Then he slammed back down. The monitor didn't change. The jagged line continued its chaotic, downward spiral.
"Again!"
300. Talis stepped forward. It was a subtle movement, sliding between two residents who were paralyzed by the sheer volume of blood. She reached out, her fingers brushing the soldier's left trapezius, just above the collarbone. There was dirt there. Ingrained, deeply packed red clay that didn't belong in this state, or even this country. But beneath the dirt and the blood, she felt the rigid, and she saw it, a small, faint tattoo. Not the standard military ink, not an eagle, not a trident, not a flag. It was a single geometric glyph, a stylized hourglass with a cracked bottom. The air left Talis's lungs, the noise of the room, the shouting doctors, the tearing of sterile packaging, the mechanical shriek of the crash cart, faded into a dull, underwater hum. She knew that mark. She hadn't seen it in a textbook. She hadn't learned it in nursing school. She had seen it 3 years ago, sketched on the back of a napkin in a diner by her brother, 2 weeks before his coffin came home sealed shut. Timekeeper. That was the unit. That was the classification, Dr. Talis said. Her voice was low, strangely calm amidst the panic. Cray ignored her. He was sweating now, the desperation of losing a high-value asset making his movements jerky and dangerous.
"Push 1 milligram of epi! Get the amiodorone hanging!"
Why is his pressure still bottoming out? Dr. Cray. Talis said again, louder this time. You can't use amiodorone. Cray spun around, his eyes wild, looking for the source of the interruption. When he landed on Talis, the youngest nurse on the rotation, the one with the thrift store shoes and the silence that unnerved the senior staff, his face twisted into a sneer of pure incredulity. "Excuse me." Cray snapped, the paddles still humming in his hands. "His heart rate isn't the problem," Talis said, her eyes locked on the soldier's graying face. "It's a reaction. Look at his pupils. Look at the rigidity in his jaw. He's not just crashing from trauma. He's been tagged." "Tagged?" Cray laughed, a harsh, breathless bark. "Nurse Jaw, get the hell out of my way. This man has lost 2 liters of blood and has a collapsed lung. I don't need a diagnosis from someone who empties bedpans for a living. He has a hyper-metabolic agent in his system." Talis pressed, stepping closer, violating the invisible barrier between doctor and subordinate. If you push the amiodarone, you'll crystallize the agent. It will stop his heart permanently. You won't be able to restart it. The room went silent. For a second, the only sound was the drowning gurgle of the soldier's breathing. Cray looked at her, really looked at her, and Tallis saw the wall of ego slam down. He didn't see a warning, he saw insubordination. He saw a girl who didn't know her place. Security! Cray barked, turning back to the patient. Remove nurse jaw from the trauma bay. Immediately, two large orderlies stepped forward, grabbing Tallis by the arms. They weren't gentle.
Wait!
Tallis struggled, her heels skidding on the bloody floor.
Check his pockets! Check his tags! He's not a regular transfer. He's codenamed Verglus. You're killing him.
Push the drugs, Cray ordered, ignoring her screaming.
Now.
The resident hesitated, the syringe hovering over the IV port. He looked at Tallis, then at Cray. The fear of authority won out. He aligned the needle. Tallis watched, helpless. As the plunger moved, she saw the clear liquid enter the tube. She saw it race toward the vein of the man who bore the only symbol that connected her to the truth of her brother's death. The moment that drug hit the soldier's heart, the monitor didn't flatline. It stopped making noise altogether. The soldier's back arched so violently that a strap on the gurney snapped with the sound of a gunshot. His mouth opened in a silent, rictus scream, his veins turning black under the skin as the chemical reaction Tallis had predicted began to tear him apart from the inside. Cray froze, the color draining from his face as the machines flashed a critical, catastrophic error. "What did you do?" Cray whispered, staring at the resident. But Tallis, pinned against the back wall by the guards, knew it wasn't the resident's fault. And she knew that in exactly 60 seconds, the man on the table, the only man who knew the secrets of the timekeeper unit, would be gone forever, unless she did the one thing that would end her career before it had even really begun. The silence that followed the injection was heavier than the screaming had been. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the room, leaving only the smell of ozone and the copper tang of imminent death. On the table, the soldier, codename Verglus, wasn't just dying. He was calcifying. The reaction was visible to the naked eye. The veins in his neck, previously bulging with exertion, turned a dark, bruised violet, then black. They stood out against his pale skin like a roadmap of necrosis, branching rapidly from his chest toward his jawline. His back was still arched, locked in that impossible, rigid bow, his muscles seizing with such violent intensity that the remaining leather restraints creaked, stretching to their breaking point. Dr. Cray stood frozen, the empty syringe still dangling from the port in the IV line. His mouth was open, but the arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the hollow, terrifying realization of a man watching his career end in real time. He stared at the monitor, which was no longer displaying a heart rhythm. It displayed a flat, digital error code IMPDNCERR. "No," said GNL. He's rigid." The resident, Dr. Oren Pike, whispered. Pike was a thin, nervous man with thick, wire-rimmed glasses that were currently sliding down a nose slick with sweat. He reached out to touch the patient's chest and recoiled instantly. "He's burning up. The skin temp is spiking. It's like touching a radiator." "Get him back!" Cray finally screamed, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. "Resume compressions!" "Don't just stand there! You can't compress stone!" Tallis shouted. She didn't wait for permission. The two orderlies holding her were staring at the body, their grip slackening in the face of the grotesque transformation. It was the only opening she needed. Tallis twisted her body, dropping her weight and driving her elbow back into the solar plexus of the guard on her right. He doubled over with a wheeze. Before the second guard could react, she spun, shoving him hard against the supply cabinets. Glass vials shattered, raining down like hail, She wasn't fighting for her safety. She was fighting for the timeline. Get away from him. Cray lunged at her as she sprinted toward the crash cart, but he was slow, clumsy with panic. Talis didn't aim for the defibrillator. She aimed for the bottom drawer, the one rarely opened during a standard trauma code. Her hands, usually steady, were trembling, but her movements were precise. She grabbed 3 ampoules of sodium bicarbonate and a large bore syringe.
Security! Stop her!
Cray bellowed, but the room had descended into anarchy. The nurses were backing away. The other residents were paralyzed. The hierarchy, the god-complex structure of the surgical wing, had fractured the moment the patient's blood turned black. Talis reached the bedside. The heat coming off the soldier was physical, a wave of feverish energy that hit her face like an open oven door. His jaw was clamped shut so tight she could hear his teeth grinding, threatening to shatter.
Pike, give me the line!
Talis ordered. Doctor? Pike looked at Cray, then at the dying man, then at Talis. He saw the black veins creeping up the soldier's neck, reaching the jaw, aiming for the brain. If that darkness reached his temporal lobe, the neurochemical storm would liquefy his cognitive centers. He would be brain dead in 10 seconds. Pike made a choice. He stepped aside. Talis jammed the syringe into the port, bypassing the regulator. She didn't push slowly. She slammed the plunger home, forcing 50 milliliters of alkaline buffer directly into the bloodstream.
Give me the second one! Now!
She screamed, discarding the empty syringe. Pike fumbled, handing her the second load. She pushed it, then the third. You are killing him. Cray grabbed Talis by the scrub top, yanking her back.
You are unauthorized! You are finished. Look at the monitor!
Talis shouted, shoving Cray's hand away with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Cray turned. The error code was gone. The flatline was gone. A rhythm, chaotic, jagged, but undeniably there, spiked on the screen. Beep, pause, beep, beep, pause, beep. The black web on the soldier's neck stopped advancing. It didn't recede, but it held its ground, halting just below the earlobe. The rigid arch of his back collapsed, his body hitting the mattress with a heavy, wet thud. He wasn't safe, but the chemical firestorm had been doused. For 5 seconds, the only sound in the room was the ragged, tearing gasps of the soldier sucking air into his lungs. Then, the double doors of the trauma bay burst open. It wasn't more hospital security. 3 men entered. They moved with a fluidity that made the doctors look like stumbling children. They wore plain clothes, dark tactical pants, gray heavy knit sweaters, no insignias. But the energy they brought into the room was heavier than gravity. The man in the lead was terrifying. He was older, perhaps 50, with iron, gray hair cropped close to the skull, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in a storm. A thick, ropey burn scar curled up from his collar, wrapping around the left side of his neck and disappearing behind his ear. This was Sergeant Major Kylan Voss. He didn't look at Dr. Cray. He didn't look at the machines. He looked directly at the soldier on the table. Clear the room, Voss said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low rumble, barely above a whisper, but it carried an absolute, non-negotiable weight. Excuse me. Cray stepped forward, trying to salvage his authority, straightening his blood-spattered coat. This is a sterile trauma bay. I am the chief of surgery. You can't just walk in here and... Voss moved. It was a blur. One moment he was at the door, the next, he was inside Cray's personal space, looming over the doctor. Voss didn't touch him. He simply stared down with eyes the color of dirty ice. I said. Voss repeated, clear the room. Now, the residents scrambled. The nurses fled. The orderlies who had been restraining Talis backed away, hands raised. Cray looked around, his face flushing crimson. I will be calling the administration. I will have the police here in 5 minutes. He turned to glare at Talis. And you. You're fired. Don't think for a second you're walking away from this. You assaulted a staff member and practiced medicine without a license. You're done. The Cray stormed out, the doors swinging violently behind him. The room was suddenly quiet, save for the beep of the monitor and the soldier's breathing. Talis stood by the bed, her hands shaking as the adrenaline crash began to hit her. She looked at the door, expecting to be thrown out next. "Not you," Voss said. He turned his gaze to her. It was a dissecting look, scanning her from her cheap shoes to her blood-speckled scrubs. He looked at the empty vials of sodium bicarbonate on the floor. Then he looked at the soldier's neck, at the fading black veins. "You stopped the Chimera reaction," Voss said. "It wasn't a question. I neutralized the pH," Talis said, her voice trembling but defiant. He was given a stimulant that reacted with the amiodarone. It created a crystallization in the vascular system. Voss walked closer, stepping over the debris on the floor. He stopped 2 feet from her. He smelled of rain and gun oil. "Standard medical training doesn't cover Chimera agents," Voss said quietly. "And it certainly doesn't teach you to recognize the deployment mark of a timekeeper unit." He gestured to the faint tattoo on the soldier's shoulder. Talis swallowed hard. "I recognized the symptoms." "No," Voss said. "You recognize the man, or what he is." He leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "No one," Talis lied. "Dr. Cray is going to destroy you," Voss said, stating it as a simple fact. "He will have your license revoked by morning. He will likely press charges for assault. Your life as a nurse is over." He paused, looking down at the unconscious soldier. "But Verglus is alive, which means we have a problem." Voss looked back at Talis. "Because he can't stay here, and now that you've touched him, neither can you." The soldier on the table groaned, his eyes fluttering open. They were bloodshot, unfocused, rolling wildly in his head. His hand shot out, gripping Talis's wrist with crushing force. "Code." The soldier rasped, blood bubbling between his teeth. "Code breaker va," or stiffened. The monitor began to beep faster again. Not a cardiac arrest this time. Panic. The words "code breaker" hung in the air, heavier than the antiseptic scent of the trauma bay. Verglus, the man who was supposed to be dead, slumped back against the blood-slicked mattress, his grip on Talis's wrist faltering, but not releasing. His breathing was shallow, a wet, rattling sound that indicated his lungs were filling with fluid again. "Sjeet." Major Voss didn't look at the patient. He looked at Talis. The intensity of his gaze felt like a physical weight, pressing the air out of her lungs. "What did he call you?" Voss asked. His voice dropped an octave, losing the command tone and entering a register of dangerous curiosity. "I don't know," Talis stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to pull her wrist free, but even unconscious, the soldier's strength was unnatural. "He's delirious. The Chimera agent causes hallucinations, neurosynaptic misfires." "He didn't say mother," Voss countered, stepping closer. "He didn't say help," he said, "code breaker." The doors swung open again. This time Dr. Cray didn't come alone. He was flanked by 2 hospital security guards and a uniformed police officer, his hand resting on the holstered taser at his hip. Behind them, a second man from Voss's unit slipped in, closing the door and locking it with a quiet, decisive click. The new arrival was jarring to look at. He was tall, lanky, and moved with a disjointed, predatory grace. His skin was pale, almost translucent, revealing the blue roadmap of veins beneath his eyes. But it was his hands that drew the eye. His left hand was wrapped in black compression tape, tremor shaking violently until he hooked his thumb into his tactical vest to still it. "Situation, boss." The pale man rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. "Perimeter, Thorn," Voss ordered, not looking away from Talis. "Nobody comes in. Nobody leaves." Dagon Thorn nodded, his mismatched eyes, one dark brown, the other a clouded, milky blue, scanning the room for threats. He moved to block the police officer, his posture relaxed but radiating lethality. "Officer," Cray shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Tallis. "That woman is to be arrested immediately. Assault practicing without a license and endangerment of a patient. I want her in cuffs, and I want these men removed from my OR." The police officer stepped forward, hand on his belt. "Ma'am, step away from the patient." Tallis looked at the officer, then at Cray. She saw the triumph in Cray's eyes. This wasn't about patient care anymore. It was about erasure. He needed her gone to cover his mistake with the amiodarone. If she left now, Verglas would die, and her testimony would be buried under a mountain of malpractice suits. "He's unstable," Tallis said, her voice shaking but her feet planted. "If I let go, his pressure drops. I'm manually compressing the radial artery. He's bleeding out internally."
"That is a lie!"
Cray spat.
"She is obstructing care! Officer, remove her!"
"Why are extracting the asset?" Voss announced. It wasn't a request. "Thorne, prep the transport litter. We leave in 2 minutes. You can't take him," Tallis said. The room froze. Voss turned his head slowly. "Excuse me. You can't move him," Tallis repeated, louder this time. She looked Voss dead in the eye, ignoring the police officer approaching her left flank. The Chimera agent creates a thermal runaway effect in the bone marrow. His core temperature is 104 degrees. If you put him in a transport vehicle, if you subject him to vibration or movement before his temperature stabilizes, the marrow will liquefy. He will stroke out before you get to the elevator. Voss stared at her. "We have medics. We have a sterile facility. Do your medics know the half-life of the agent?" Tallis challenged. "Do they know that the antidote creates a secondary acid buildup if the kidneys aren't flushed every 3 minutes? Because Dr. Cray certainly doesn't." Cray bristled.
"I am the chief of... You almost killed him!"
Tallis screamed, the frustration finally breaking through her professional veneer. "You pushed a stimulant into a hyper-metabolic system. You don't get to speak anymore." The police officer grabbed Tallis's shoulder. "Ma'am, that's enough. Hands behind your back. Let her go," Voss said. The officer paused. "Sir, this is a crime scene. You have no jurisdiction here," I said. Voss unholstered his sidearm, not pointing it, but letting it hang visible and heavy at his side. "Let her go." Thorne stepped forward, interposing himself between the cop and Tallis. The pale man smiled, a ghastly expression that didn't reach his dead, milky eye. "Officer, I highly suggest you reconsider the physics of this situation." The tension in the room was a wire pulled to the breaking point. The monitor began to shriek again. Verglas was seizing.
He's crashing!
Tallis shouted, ripping her arm free from the hesitant officer.
"Thorne! I need ice! Saline ice! Now! Pack his axilla and groin!"
"We have to drop the temp." Thorne didn't wait for Voss's order. He moved, tearing open the freezer unit in the corner of the trauma bay. Cray yelled, "That is hospital property!" Tallis ignored him. She grabbed a liter of cold saline, spiked the bag and hung it. "Voss,
"Hold his legs! If he thrashes, he'll dislodge the clot!"
For a second, the hierarchy of the world suspended itself. The sergeant major of a tier, 1 unit looked at the 24-year-old nurse from Wyoming. He saw the sweat on her brow, the blood on her hands, and the absolute, unshakable certainty in her eyes. He made a choice. Voss holstered his weapon and grabbed the soldier's legs, pinning them with massive, hydraulic strength. "Thorne, get her the ice." "You are making a mistake," Cray hissed, backing away as Thorne dumped bags of frozen saline onto the gurney. "I will have the National Guard here. I will have the FBI. You do that," Voss growled, not looking up. Tallis worked. She stripped the blankets off Verglas, packing the ice packs against his burning skin. She adjusted the flow rate of the cooling fluids. She checked the pupil response. "Come on," she whispered. her hand resting on the soldier's chest, feeling the terrifying heat radiating through his ribs. "Don't you quit. Not after I saved you." Slowly, agonizingly, the seizure stopped. The heart rate on the monitor dropped from a lethal 180 to a manageable 130. The temperature gauge inched down. Talis exhaled a long, shaky breath. She looked up and found Cray watching her. The look on his face wasn't relief. It was pure, distilled hatred. She had just proven him incompetent in front of witnesses, in front of the police, in front of special operations. She had saved the patient. But she had sealed her own fate. "You're done, Jaw," Cray said quietly, his voice cutting through the mechanical hum of the room. "You realize that? You walk out of this room, you never work in medicine again. I'll make sure you can't even get a job as a vet tech." Talis looked at her hands. They were trembling now. She thought of the ranch, of the debt, of the years of study, of the crushing weight of being the one who survived when her brother didn't. She looked at Verglus. The tattoo on his shoulder seemed to pulse. "I know," Talis whispered. Voss straightened up. He looked at the monitor, then at Talis. The calculation in his eyes had shifted. He wasn't looking at an recence anymore. He was looking at a resource. Voss said, "Prep the extract. We move in 5. Boss," Thorn asked. She said movement kills him. "She's coming with us," Voss said. Talis froze. "What?" "You just lost your job," Voss said, his face hard as stone. "And you know too much about this unit. You're not staying here." "I can't just leave," Talis protested. "I have a life. I have nothing." Voss cut her off. He gestured to Cray, who was frantically typing on his phone in the corner. "In 5 minutes, this building will be swarming with federal agents who answer to men who want Verglus dead. You stay, you go to prison, or you disappear." He extended a hand. It was scarred, calloused, and demanding. "You want to save him?" Voss asked. "Then you finish the job." The exit wasn't like the movies. There were no smoke grenades, no suppressive fire, no screaming tires. It was a terrifyingly efficient dismantle of reality. One moment, Talis was standing in the trauma bay, the fluorescent lights buzzing over the wreckage of her career. The next, she was moving. Thorn didn't ask the police officer to move. He simply stepped into the man's personal space with a speed that blurred the air, applying a single, precise pressure point to the junction of the neck and shoulder. The officer's knees buckled, his eyes rolling back as he crumpled silently to the floor. "Move," Voss commanded. Talis grabbed the ambu bag, squeezing air into Verglus's lungs as they ran. The gurney rattled violently over the threshold, every vibration sending a spike of fear through her. Movement kills him. They hit the loading dock, just as the wail of sirens began to bleed into the night air. A black, unmarked Sprinter van was waiting, rear doors gaping open like a hungry mouth.
"Easy!"
Talis screamed as they lifted the heavy frame of the soldier. "If you jar him, the marrow releases more calcium. You'll turn his blood to cement." They slid him in. Voss grabbed Talis by the back of her scrubs and hauled her up into the dark, metal belly of the van. The doors slammed shut, sealing them in a sudden, suffocating gloom illuminated only by the red tactical lights on the interior walls. "Thorn, drive," Voss barked. "Keep it under 40. Avoid potholes. If you hit a bump, he dies." The engine growled, a low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the floorboards and straight into Talis's knees. She fell to her knees beside Verglus, her hands flying over his body, checking lines, checking pulses. The van lurched forward. "Stabilize him," Voss ordered, looming over her in the cramped space.
"I'm trying."
Talis snapped back, sweat stinging her eyes. "Hold the flashlight steady." She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a spy. But as the van navigated the back alleys of the city, evading the grid of approaching police cruisers, Talis' jaw felt a strange, cold familiarity settle over her. This wasn't the sterile chaos of the ER. This was the dirt, floor panic of the ranch during a blizzard, keeping a foal alive when the power was out and the roads were buried. This was the suppressed strength of a girl who had learned early that help wasn't coming, and that tears were a waste of hydration. "Pressure is dropping," Tallis announced, her voice flat. "The vibration is accelerating the reaction. I need to cushion his spine." She looked around the tactical van. There were weapons racks, ammo crates, satellite radios. Nothing soft, nothing forgiving. Tallis demanded, looking at Voss.
"What?" "Give me your damn coat."
Voss didn't hesitate. He stripped off his heavy tactical jacket. Tallis grabbed it, bunching it up. She needed to lift Verglas's hips to relieve the pressure on the femoral arteries, to create a suspension system out of fabric and muscle. "Lift him on 3, she ordered. Voss, a man who commanded Tier 1 operators, obeyed the nurse without a word. They lifted. She shoved the coat underneath. The soldier groaned. A low, guttural sound of agony that didn't sound entirely human. "Easy, easy," Tallis whispered, leaning close to his ear, her hand smoothing the sweat-soaked hair back from his forehead. "I've got you." "Stay with the sound of my voice." The soldier's eyes cracked open again. In the red light, he looked like a ghost caught between worlds. He looked at Tallis, and for a second the haze cleared. "Ah," he wheezed. The name hit Tallis like a physical blow. She recoiled, her back hitting the metal wall of the van. "Stop the van," Tallis whispered. "We can't stop," Thorne called from the front, his voice calm despite swerving to avoid a pothole. "We have local PD sweeping the grid." "Her knows my brother," Tallis said, her voice trembling. She looked at Voss. "I just said my brother's name." Voss went still. The shadows in the van seemed to deepen. "Aris Jor." Tallis nodded, tears finally spilling over hot and fast. "Aris Jor, 1st Battalion, killed in action 3 years ago in the Kandahar Valley." That's what the official letter said. "Closed casket, training accident." Voss looked at the dying man, then back at Tallis. The contempt, it all vanished, replaced by a heavy, mournful recognition. "It wasn't a training accident," Voss said quietly. "I know," Tallis whispered, "because Aris sent me a letter. 2 days before he died. He drew the hourglass. He told me that if I ever saw it again, I should run the other way." As she looked down at her hands, stained with the blood of the man on the stretcher. "I didn't run," she said. Suddenly, Verglas arched his back, a fresh seizure gripping him. The monitor, a portable unit Voss had thrown in, screamed a warning.
"He's bradycardic!"
Tallis shouted, the past instantly forgotten in the urgency of the present.
"Heart rate is 30! He's coding again! We're 5 minutes out!"
Thorne yelled from the front.
"He doesn't have 5 minutes!"
Tallis ripped open the soldier's shirt, buttons flying. "The acid buildup is stopping the electrical nodes. I need to bypass the heart's pacemaker." "How?" Voss demanded. "Percussive pacing," Tallis said. She made a fist. "I have to hit him. Hard. I have to force the heart to beat manually. Do it." Tallis rose up on her knees. She looked at the chest of the man who knew her brother, the man who held the secrets of a war she wasn't supposed to know existed. She thought of Aris. She thought of the empty casket. She brought her fist down. "Nothing, come on!" She struck again, harder, driving her knuckles into the sternum. Thump. The monitor beeped once. A lonely, isolated tone. Again. Voss yelled. Tallis struck him with everything she had, a rhythmic, violent assault on death itself. She wasn't just hitting a patient. She was hitting the silence that had swallowed her family. She was hitting the lies. Thump. Thump. Beep. Beep. The rhythm caught. Weak, thready, but real. Tallis slumped back, gasping for air, her hand throbbing. The van slowed, turning onto gravel. The sound of crunching stones signaled the end of the road. "We're here," Thorne said. The back doors opened, but it wasn't a hospital. It was an aircraft hangar, vast and hollow, smelling of jet fuel and rain. Voss jumped out, then turned to help pull the stretcher. He stopped, looking at Talis, who was still kneeling beside the soldier, her energy spent. "You didn't run." Voss repeated her words, his voice rough. "You should have." He reached in and grabbed her arm, pulling her out of the van and onto the cold concrete. "Welcome to the ghost roster," Voss said. "You're dead to the world now, just like him." The hangar wasn't empty. It was occupied by a single, modular medical container, a sterile white box sitting in the center of the vast oil-stained concrete floor like a dropped tooth. Inside, the air was filtered and freezing. The lighting was surgical grade, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating every pore on the soldier's graying face. They had transferred Verglus to the operating table. He was stripped to the waist, revealing a torso that was a tapestry of violence, old bullet wounds, knife scars, and the fresh, angry incision where they had removed the tactical vest. But the terrifying thing was the skin itself. It was hardening. The Chimera agent wasn't just heating him up, it was seizing his collagen, turning his dermis into a rigid shell that would eventually suffocate his internal organs. Talis stood over him, her hands hovering, trembling slightly from the adrenaline crash. "The ice isn't holding," she said, her voice hollow. His core temp is climbing back up, 105, 106. Once he hits 108, the proteins in his brain denature. He's gone. Voss stood on the other side of the table, his face a mask of grim acceptance. He was stripping a fresh IV kit, his movements efficient, but lacking the frantic energy of the hospital. He knew the odds. "We have the neutralizer," Ton said, stepping forward from a metal cabinet. He held up a vial of thick, amber liquid, but the protocol says it requires a dialysis filter. "We don't have a machine." "If you push that into him without filtration," Talis said, looking at the vial, "the chemical shear will shred his kidneys. He'll bleed out internally in minutes." "It's that or the fever cooks his brain," Voss said. "Make the call, Jaw." Talis looked at the soldier. She looked at the tattoo of the broken hourglass. "There is another way," she said. The room went quiet. The hum of the portable generator seemed to get louder. "In the 1950s, Talis said, her eyes fixed on Verglus's chest, before bypass machines were perfected, surgeons used cross-circulation. They used a donor, a human pump. Voss stopped what he was doing. "You want to link your circulatory system to his." "I'm O negative," Talis said. "Universal donor. But more importantly, I have a healthy liver and kidneys. If we shunt his blood through me, I can filter the toxicity while you push the neutralizer. My system takes the hit. His system gets the cure." "Absolutely not," Voss said immediately. "The Chimera agent is a neurotoxin. Even diluted, it will attack your nervous system. It causes permanent nerve damage, peripheral neuropathy, tremors." He looked at her hands, her strong, capable, ranch work hands. "You're a nurse," Voss said, his voice dropping to a low, intense rumble. "Your hands are your life. You do this and you will never hold a scalpel again. You might not even be able to hold a pen without shaking." Talis looked down at her hands. She thought of the years of study, the late nights, the dream of eventually going to med school, of becoming the Dr. Cray never was. She thought of the life she had built to escape the emptiness of the ranch. Then she looked at Verglus. She saw the way his jaw was set, even in unconsciousness. She saw the ghost of her brother in the way he carried his scars. If this man died, the truth about Aris died with him. The Timekeeper unit would remain a shadow, and her brother would remain a training accident. "My brother," Talis whispered. "Did he suffer?" Voss hesitated. He looked at Thorn, then back at Talis. "Yes." The word hung in the cold air. "Then I'm not letting him go," Talis said. She rolled up the sleeve of her scrub top, exposing the pale skin of her inner arm. "Hook me up." "Talis," Voss warned. "There is no coming back from this. You sacrifice your career right here, right now? For a man you don't know. I know his code name, she said, her voice steady, though her heart was breaking. And I know he came back for a reason. As she climbed onto the narrow gurney beside the dying soldier, it was tight. Their shoulders touched, one burning with lethal heat, the other cold with fear. Voss didn't argue again. He respected the cost too much to cheapen it with debate. He prepped the lines, 2 large bore catheters, one in Verglas's femoral artery, one in Talis's, another set for the return flow. Thorn, push the neutralizer on my mark, Voss ordered. He looked at Talis. Bite down on this. He handed her a thick roll of gauze. She placed it between her teeth. Initiating cross-circulation, Voss said. 2. He opened the clamps. The pain was immediate and absolute. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a heavy, sickening wave of wrongness. She felt the hot, toxic blood of the soldier flood into her vein, a river of fire moving up her arm, slamming into her chest. Talis gasped, biting hard into the gauze to stifle a scream. Her vision blurred. The metallic taste of the Chimera agent hit the back of her tongue instantly. Heart rates are sensing, Thorn called out, watching the monitor. Filtration is active. Talis turned her head to the side. She looked at Verglas. The color was returning to his face. The rigid stone-like texture of his skin was softening. The heat was leaving him and entering her. Her arm began to spasm. The fingers of her left hand curled into a claw, locking up as the neurotoxin hit the nerve endings. She tried to open them, but the signal didn't go through. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, hot and salty. She could feel the damage happening. She could feel the fine motor control, the steadiness she had prided herself on, being burned away, synapse by synapse. It's gone, she thought. My future, it's gone. But as the fire ravaged her nerves, Verglas took a breath, a deep, clear, unobstructed breath. His eyes opened, not rolling wildly this time, but sharp, clear as a glacier. He turned his head. He was inches from her face. He saw the tubes connecting them. He saw the sweat on her face, the agony in her eyes. He saw her clawed, trembling hand. He knew exactly what she was doing. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But he reached out with his right hand, the one that wasn't calcified, and covered her trembling fist with his own. He squeezed, an anchor in the storm. Clear, Thorn said softly. Toxin levels are negligible. He's stable. Voss clamped the lines. He pulled the needles. Talis spat out the gauze. Gasping, her body shivering violently, she tried to push herself up, but her left arm collapsed under her weight. It was numb, alien, buzzing with a static that she knew would never fully go away. Voss helped her sit up. He checked her pulse, then held up her left hand. It was shaking, a rhythmic, coarse tremor that didn't stop. I told you, Voss said quietly. Talis cradled her ruined hand against her chest. She looked at Verglas, who was watching her with an expression of profound, shattered gratitude. Is he safe? She asked, her voice raspy. He's safe, Voss said. Then it was worth it, she lied. But as she looked down at her trembling fingers, the grief hit her harder than the toxin. She had saved the soldier. She had saved the truth. But the young nurse who had walked into the trauma bay that morning was dead. The dawn didn't break. It bruised the sky, a deep, hematoma purple, blood into the horizon, as the black sprinter van idled in the shadows of the hospital's loading dock, the same place where Talis's life had fractured only hours before. Inside the van, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of tension, but of aftermath. Verglas was conscious. He lay propped up against the metal wall, a thermal blanket draped over his shoulders. His color had returned, the deathly gray replaced by the pale exhaustion of a survivor. He watched Talis with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Talis sat opposite him. She held her left hand in her right, trying to still the tremor. It was a coarse, rhythmic shaking, a neurological metronome ticking away the seconds of a future she could no longer inhabit. Her thumb twitched uncontrollably. The fine motor control required to suture a vein or insert a catheter was gone. "You traded your hands for my life," Verglas said. His voice was gravel, wrecked by the scream he had held inside, but it was steady. "I traded them for the truth," Talis corrected, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look up. She couldn't bear to see the gratitude in his eyes. It felt too expensive. "Aris," the soldier said softly. Talis froze. He was the radio operator. Verglas continued, the words coming slow and deliberate. "We were pinned in the Peck Valley. Ambush, 600 to 4. We needed air support, but the comms were jammed. Aris left cover. He climbed the ridge to get a signal." Talis closed her eyes, tears leaking hot and fast. "He told me he was safe. He told me he sat at a desk." "I lied to protect you," Verglas said. He took 3 rounds to the chest. "But he got the signal out. He saved the whole team. He saved me." The soldier leaned forward, wincing as his stiffened muscles protested. "I didn't come back to die on a table, Talis. I came back to find you. To tell you that he didn't die for nothing." The grief hit her then, not as a sharp stab, but as a heavy, settling weight. It was the closure she had chased for 3 years, delivered in the back of a tactical van by a man who should be dead. "Time to go," Voss said from the driver's seat. His voice was devoid of sentiment, but he didn't turn around. He gave them the privacy of the moment. Talis nodded. She wiped her face with her shaking hand. "What happens now?" she asked. "You go back inside," Voss said. "You face the music, and you trust the protocol." Talis stepped out of the van. The cold morning air bit through her thin scrubs. She felt small, fragile, and utterly ruined. She walked up the concrete ramp, the automatic doors sliding open to swallow her back into the sterile beast. She didn't go to the locker room. She went straight to the administration wing. She knew where Dr. Cray would be. He was waiting in the Chief of Staff's office. The glass walls offered no privacy, but at this hour, the hallway was empty. Cray stood behind the mahogany desk, flanked by the same police officer from the night before and a man in a cheap grey suit. Hospital legal counsel. When Talis entered, Cray didn't shout. He smiled. It was a cold, satisfied expression of a man who had already won. "M's jaw," Cray said, smoothing his tie. "I'm surprised you came back. I assumed you would be halfway to the state line by now." "I'm not running," Talis said. She hid her trembling left hand behind her back. "Officer," Cray nodded to the cop. "This is the individual. Assault, theft of controlled substances, gross negligence resulting in, well, we assume the death of the patient since the body is missing." The officer stepped forward, handcuffs rattling on his belt. Talis' jaw. "You are under arrest for, sit down," a voice boomed from the doorway. It wasn't a shout. It was a command that carried the weight of tectonic plates shifting. Cray's head snapped up. The officer froze. Standing in the doorway was a man Talis had never seen. He was short, thick-necked, wearing a nondescript wool coat over a dark suit. He looked like a weary accountant, except for the security badge clipped to his lapel. A badge that bore no photo, only a silver eagle and a clearance level that didn't exist in civilian databases. Behind him stood 2 uniformed MPs, their presence filling the corridor with silent menace. "Who are you?" Cray demanded, his voice pitching up. "This is a private meeting. You can't." The man in the wool coat walked into the room, ignoring Cray entirely. He walked straight to the police officer. He held out a single sheet of paper. "Federal jurisdiction," the man said. "National Security Act, Section 404. The event in Trauma Bay 1 did not happen. The patient did not exist. There was no assault." The officer looked at the paper, then at the man's badge. He paled. He holstered his cuffs, tipped his cap to Talis, and walked out of the room without a word.
"Now wait a minute!"
Cray slammed his hand on the desk.
"You can't just wipe this away! She assaulted me! She hijacked my ore! She is fired!
I will see to it that she never practices medicine in this country again. The man finally looked at Cray. His eyes were bored. Dr. Cray, the man said, you administered a contra-indicated pharmacological agent to a classified asset. You nearly caused a catastrophic biological event on U.S. soil. The only reason you aren't in a black site right now is because she saved him. He gestured to Talis. Cray opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face. Ms. Jaw is not fired. The man continued. She is resigning, effective immediately, with a full commendation for her service and a severance package that reflects the unique nature of her departure. He placed a file on the desk. Sign it, the man ordered, or we release the toxicology report from the patient's initial intake, the one that proves your negligence. Cray looked at the file. He looked at Talis. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a small, frightened bureaucrat. He sat down heavily. He picked up a pen. The man turned to Talis. The boredom left his face, replaced by a solemn, quiet respect. The country thanks you, Ms. Jaw, he said. The unit thanks you. He didn't offer a handshake. He knew about her hand. Instead, he gave her a salute in everything but motion. Then he turned and left, the MPs following in his wake. The room was silent. The clock on the wall ticked loud and abrasive. Cray signed the paper. He slid it across the desk. He wouldn't look at her. Talis picked up the resignation form. It was her freedom. It was her vindication. But as she reached for it, her left hand came into view. It was shaking violently, the spasms jerking her fingers in a cruel, uncontrollable dance. She had to use her right hand to steady it just to hold the paper. She looked at Cray. He was staring at her hand. He saw the cost. He saw the ruin of her surgical dreams. And for the first time, she saw shame in his eyes. Talis didn't speak. She didn't need to. She took the paper, turned her back on the man who had tried to destroy her, and walked out of the office. She walked through the busy morning lobby, past the new nurses starting their shifts, past the doctors rushing to rounds. They were part of a world she had just been exiled from. She walked out the front doors into the blinding morning sun. She was free. She was vindicated. She looked down at her hand. It was still shaking. She had won the battle. But the war had taken its toll. The Wyoming wind didn't care about the past. It tore across the high plains with a biting, indifferent cold that found every gap in the barn wood and every old fracture in a human bone. Talis Jaw stood by the fence line, the heavy leather gloves protecting her hands from the rusted barbed wire, but doing nothing to stop the shaking. It had been 6 months. The winter had come early to the ranch, burying the memories of the city, the hospital, and the sterile white lights under 3 feet of snow. Talis adjusted the collar of her canvas coat. Her left hand, hidden inside the glove, was vibrating. It was a constant, rhythmic hum, a neurological static that never turned off. She couldn't thread a needle anymore. She couldn't hold a scalpel. Even pouring coffee required a two-handed grip and a moment of focused, deliberate breathing. The career she had spent 6 years building was gone, dissolved in the bloodstream of a man she would likely never see again. But the ranch was still here. The horses still needed feeding. The fences still needed mending. The work didn't require steady hands, it required a steady will. And Talis had plenty of that left. A truck crunched up the long gravel driveway, the sound distinct against the howling wind. It wasn't a local truck. It was a dark, heavy-duty pickup, clean and unmarked, with tinted windows that reflected the gray sky. Talis didn't move. She watched as it came to a halt near the gate. The engine cut. The door opened. Sergeant Major Kylan Voss stepped out. He wasn't wearing the tactical gear or the blood-spattered clothes of the trauma bay. He wore jeans and a thick shearling jacket, looking less like a ghost and more like the tired, hardened men who populated this part of the country. But the scar on his neck still marked him as something other. He walked to the fence, his boots crunching in the snow. He didn't say hello, he simply leaned against the post, looking out at the horizon where the mountains met the clouds. "You're hard to find," Voss said. His voice was low, carrying that same granite weight. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Tallis replied. She didn't take off her gloves. She didn't want him to see the tremor. Voss reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, folded newspaper clipping and held it out. Tallis hesitated, then took it. Her hand shook visibly as she grasped the paper fluttering like a leaf in a gale. Voss watched, but his eyes held no pity. Only recognition. It was a short article from the city paper. Hospital chief of surgery resigns amidst administrative restructuring. No scandal. No mention of nearly killed soldiers or illegal procedures. Just a quiet, gray exit for Dr. Harlan Cray. He's teaching anatomy at a community college in Ohio, Voss said. He'll never touch a patient again. Tallis looked at the clipping, then let the wind take it. It tumbled across the snow, disappearing into the white. "Is that why you came?" she asked. "To tell me the score is even?" "No," Voss said. "The score is never even." He reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out something heavier, a small velvet box. He placed it on the fence post between them. "Aris didn't die in a training accident," Voss said quietly. "He died holding a frequency open so a medevac could land. He saved 12 men that day, including Verglus." Tallis stared at the box. "This is his silver star," Voss said. "It's been sitting in a classified file for 3 years because we couldn't acknowledge the operation. It belongs to you." Tallis reached out. The medal sat inside, stark and beautiful against the velvet. "And Verglus?" she asked, her voice tight. "Back in the dark," Voss said. "He's fully operational. He wanted you to have this." He slid a second object onto the post. It wasn't a medal, it was a patch. A small insignia featuring a stylized hourglass. "He also wanted you to know that the unit has a vacancy," Voss said, turning to look at her fully. "We don't need surgeons. We have plenty of those. We need trainers, people who can teach medics how to think when the world is burning, people who don't freeze." He nodded at her shaking hand. "The tremor doesn't matter in a classroom, Tallis. Your mind is still sharp. The offer is open." Tallis looked at the patch. She thought of the adrenaline, the purpose, the feeling of being part of the machine that kept the monsters at bay. It was a way back. A way to matter again in the way she used to define it. Then she looked at the vast, open sky of the ranch. She felt the cold air in her lungs. She thought of the silence she had finally found. She picked up the medal. She left the patch on the post. "My brother gave his life to that hourglass," Tallis said softly. "I gave my hands to it. I think the debt is paid." Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded, a gesture of immense respect. "Fair enough," he said. He pushed off the fence. "If you ever change your mind, you know the code name." He walked back to the truck. He didn't look back. The engine fired, and the vehicle rolled away, leaving only tire tracks in the snow. Tallis stood alone in the cold. She took off her glove. She held her left hand up to the dying light. It was shaking, the fingers dancing to their own broken rhythm. For months, she had looked at this hand with hatred. She had seen it as a ruin, a failure, a stolen future. But now, she saw it differently. The tremor wasn't a weakness, it was a receipt. It was the physical proof that when the moment came, when the life of a stranger hung in the balance, and the experts were paralyzed by fear, she had acted. She had traded her comfort for his breath. She closed her hand into a fist. The shaking didn't stop, but it didn't matter. She put the medal in her pocket. She picked up a bucket of feed with her good hand. The sun dipped below the mountains, casting long, purple shadows across the snow. The world was quiet. The heroes were silent. And Talis' jaw went back to work. We live in a world that is obsessed with being seen. We are told that if our achievements aren't broadcast, they don't count. But the truest form of courage is the kind that happens in an empty room, with no applause, where the only reward is the quiet knowledge that you did the right thing when it cost you everything. Thank you for listening to this story. If this narrative resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe and share this with someone who knows the weight of carrying a burden in silence.